Okay, so today we're going to talk about stress. Don't stress out. I'll try to make this as easy as I can for you guys. What is stress?
Kind of response.
It's a response to something, okay?
A response to a changing situation.
I'm sorry, what to a changing?
A response to a changing situation that you're not used to it.
So it's a particular type of response. It's a response to a changing situation that maybe you're not used to. Okay, anything else? Tension. So it might not be a response, but like a feeling that you have. Like, oh man, I feel so stressed out, right? So we can talk about stress in a variety of different ways. Some people talk about stress as if stress is a stimulus. It's something out there. There's something that's, stressful. Like, if you hear doctors say, take a vacation to get away from your stress. It's the idea that the stress is something that you can get away from. So it's a stimulus that you can remove. So in one sense, we have it as a stimulus. In another sense, possibly the most common sense, it's a response. It's a response that you have to particular stimuli. Oh man, would you guys please participate? You're so stressing me out. I feel like you're not understanding. You don't like me because you're not participating. Right? It's a response to some stimulus or lack thereof. It could be a state. Not just a response to a stimulus, but this thing, did you say it goes there? This sort of tension, this state that someone feels, that's related to a response. And we'll talk a little bit more about the relationship a bit later. So if you look at definitions of stress on the internet, it's funny because stress seems like such an easy concept. You know when you're stressed. But if you actually try to define it, this is a really difficult thing to do. Remember, one of the purposes of science is to identify and describe. So we're still struggling with identifying and describing stress adequately. So one website says it's forces from the inside or from the outside that affect the individual. What type of stress definition is this? Is this a stimulus, a response, or a state definition? This is a stimulus definition, right? It's something that's affecting you. A process by which we perceive and respond to events that are perceived as harmful or challenging. Yeah, that's a response definition. The word response gives it away, basically. And finally, we have on Wikipedia the consequences of the failure to respond adequately to mental, emotional, or physical demands, whether or not they're actual or imagined. Now, this is a state. Now, notice that the state is related to the response in the definition, right? It's a consequence of a particular type of response. So some of your body's responses to stressors, the stimuli, will put you in a state where you perceive feeling tense or nervousness. So there's this, what do you call it? I don't know. The chicken and the egg, which came first? Did the egg lay the chicken? Or did the chicken come out of the egg? So what causes stress? I mean, we have this problem, right? Because we said that stress could be the stimulus or it could be the response. So what is it?
Unexpected conditions.
Could be unexpected conditions. So having to get up out of our normal classroom to come here may have been stressful for you. It was probably more stressful for me because when I came in here, I'm not used to using this room. I thought that I would have a computer. I'd just, stick my thing in just like the other room, but it wasn't. Right? This is unexpected for me. This is stressful. So unexpected things, what other things cause stress?
Environmental changes.
Environmental changes. So you might be expecting something to happen, but it could still cause stress. Like what type of environmental change might you expect to cause stress?
Maybe move to another place.
Moving to another place.
It's also unexpected
Or
conditions.
change in your workplace.
Changing your workplace. How about summer? There's a point in summer that stresses my wife out quite a bit.
The temperature.
The temperature. We know it's going to get hot, so it's not unexpected. But when it gets hot enough, my wife gets stressed out, and she bugs me to buy a klima, an air conditioner. Stressors are what cause stress. Partial. So remember how we had these earlier definitions and we had the stimuli, the response, and the state? So we're going to stop referring to stress as a stimulus, and instead we're going to use the word stressor to identify the stimuli as stressors. So stimuli that can cause stress, lack of food. If you don't have food, this can stress you out. I was getting stressed out because I haven't eaten gier in a couple months. But last night I had gier in Fati. So I'm not feeling that stress anymore. Pain. Pain causes stress. Do people like to be in pain? No. Little kids. Oh man, they can be so annoying sometimes. They punch each other. Punch, punch, punch. Or like, my son sometimes will come up to me while I'm playing a video game and trying to relax. Dad! And I'm like so engaged in the video game that I'm not paying attention to anything else. He just keeps poking me. And the pain like builds up. And then it's like, what? What do you want, right? Cold can cause stress. Excessive heat can cause stress. Loud noise can cause stress. Boom! Loud noises. Isolation can cause stress if you feel like you don't have any friends. If you're worried about being isolated, maybe you're going to give a speech for a class and you're worried about looking stupid and your friends won't want to hang out with you anymore, right? These are all things that can cause stress. What's the relationship between these things and reinforcement? Remember when we were talking about classical and operant conditioning? So, like negative reinforcement, if we're in pain, we want to get rid of it. If we're cold, we don't want to be cold anymore. If we're isolated, most of us want to get around some friends. Not everyone, most of us. If you guys remember when we talked about social learning and we talked about modeling and we said that people need to pay attention, they need to remember, and they need to have the ability, they also need to be motivated, right? And these are things that will motivate people to react in certain ways, right? Because there's something that's uncomfortable. And if we can get rid of them, then we negatively reinforce ourselves because we're removing some. All right, so homeostasis. What is homeostasis? Huh?
The balance, the psychological balance of ourselves.
So homeostasis is about balance. And you said there's a psychological balance, but it's not just the psychological balance. We could talk about like a psychological homeostasis. More generally, just a physical homeostasis. What temperature does your body like to be at? 37, right? I think?
Yeah.
I get confused because in the States we use Fahrenheit, so I think 98.6. But yeah, 37. Right? So your body likes to be at that temperature. So homeostasis is this state of balance. If you like physics, you can think about Newton's first law, right? Which is that objects in motion tend to stay in motion unless acted upon by some outside force, which means that things basically keep doing what they're doing unless something else acts on them. So our body is basically keeping doing what it's doing unless something else acts on it. So these stressors, in a lot of situations, act to disrupt this balance. So my wife, in the summer, the heat, it's trying to warm her body up, right? Past 37. This is bad. If people get too hot over 37, what happens?
Yes.
If you get a really high fever, what can happen?
Brain.
You can get brain damage. And if it's too high, you can even die from it, right? Your body doesn't want to die. So what does it do? Yeah, you might stay at home, but there's something else that your body does, regardless of whether you stay at home or, go somewhere else.
Cool
Huh?
it off. Cool the body off.
Yeah, but how does the body do that? How does the body cool itself off?
Respiration.
Yeah, the body perspires, right? We produce sweat, and good grief. The evaporation of the sweat cools us down, right? So our body tries to keep us in homeostasis. If we haven't had food in a long time, our blood sugar drops down too low. What do we need to do to get the blood sugar back up? You need to eat something. We have too much noise. This arouses people. It's interesting. People that live in really, really high areas of noise, they show signs of chronic stress. So you can handle, go to a party and enjoy a nice, loud, band, but not too loud because you don't want to damage your hearing. But if you have that same type of noise all the time, imagine trying to sleep with that, right? You wake up to it, you're trying to eat to it, you're trying to have a conversation with someone. This is stressful. It can disrupt this balance. So what is stress if we think about homeostasis?
Unbalanced situation.
Pardon?
Unbalanced situation.
There's an unbalanced situation, and stress we could define as our body's responses to restore the homeostasis. This process of trying to restore homeostasis is known as allostasis. So if we define stress in this way, this is a response definition that could lead to a state. Right? Oh my goodness, this is so scary. You guys watch these YouTube videos where they're like, oh, watch this cute little kid, and it's like a kid playing, and then all of a sudden, it freaks you out. Lions and tigers and bullies, oh my, if you've watched Wizard of Oz, you know where that comes from. Lions and tigers, they're not necessarily something that disrupt homeostasis in the same way that lack of food does, or a high temperature does. Right? What do lions and tigers and bullies do to disrupt homeostasis? I mean, certainly they can disrupt homeostasis, right? And they get you, the lion rips your gut open, that's going to disrupt your homeostasis, right? You're going to lose blood, you're going to pass out. Bullies, they can do similar things, but even if the tigers and the lions and the bullies never get to you, people can feel stressed about it, right? Why?
Perception.
Yeah, there's perception involved. So I don't have to be cut open by a tiger to feel stress. I can just see a tiger near me that's not on a leash, not behind a cage, and I can feel stress. Right? So there's a perception of some threat that could disrupt homeostasis, right? These things maybe haven't disrupted homeostasis yet, but they certainly have the potential to. Right? So by perceiving this threat, this activates a particular part of your nervous system called the autonomic nervous system. What is the autonomic nervous system? What does it do? There's a hint in the name, auto.
Control by itself.
It regulates things, it controls by itself, meaning it works automatically. What does it work automatically to do? Yeah, we need our heart to beat, right? And our brain actually controls our heartbeat. If we need our heart to beat faster, our brain sends signals down and it speeds things up. We need to breathe. You don't have to think about breathing to do it. You just do it. You can exert some voluntary control, right? So you can hold your breath if you want to. Or you can breathe really fast. But when you're not thinking about controlling it voluntarily, the autonomic nervous system handles this automatically. So, the autonomic nervous system, it controls involuntary functions related to the 4 F's. So the 4 F's are fighting, fleeing, feeding, and mating. So these are the 4 F's: fighting, fleeing, feeding, and mating. What do these things have to do with life?
Adrenaline.
So some of these produce adrenaline, yeah. But think about it. We fight and we flee in order to survive dangerous situations, right? We feed. There might not be a dangerous situation, but we need to stay alive. We need to survive. If we're going with an evolutionary perspective, what do we need to survive to do? We need to survive to mate and pass on our genes, right? So these are all really sort of vital things that humans need to do if there are going to be humans later down the road. So we have 2 divisions of the autonomic nervous system that we're going to talk about. One is the parasympathetic nervous system. The other is the sympathetic nervous system. What does the parasympathetic nervous system do? responds to stimulus activities. Yeah, but that's really broad because stimuli could be anything, so.
Slow down body response.
Yeah, the parasympathetic slows you down. There's a phrase that, if you can remember, will help you to remember what the parasympathetic nervous system does. The parasympathetic nervous system is largely responsible for resting and digesting. So they say rest and digest. So you don't have to think about like, okay, I have food in my stomach now, let's squeeze it a couple times and release some acid and then move it into my small intestines or whatever comes next. Right? This happens automatically. And when you're going to sleep at night, you need to relax. And in fact, if you force yourself, or try to force yourself, what happens? It's hard to fall asleep. If you're like, oh man, come on, I need to fall asleep right now. Come on, relax. Right? This is something that happens sort of automatically, and if you try to force it, it usually makes things worse. Para means around. If you guys have heard about paralegals or paramedics, the paramedics, they're not the real medics, which are the doctors. They're the people that work around the doctors. They come to someone when they're sick, and they bring them to the doctors. The paralegals, they're people that work around the legals or the lawyers, right? They don't go into court and argue cases, but they work around the lawyers to help the lawyers do their jobs. Similarly, the parasympathetic nervous system is going to be working around the sympathetic. So para's working around the sympathetic nervous system, and this deals with long-term needs. What happens if you don't rest for a long time? How do you feel if you pull an all-nighter? Or 2 all-nighters in a row? You feel really, really bad, right? This decreases your arousal, decreases your ability to function. We need to rest. But we don't need to rest necessarily right now. Right? You might be tired right now and think to yourself, boy, I'd really like to go to sleep. But you don't have to rest right now. You can wait until the end of the class to do it. Similarly, you might be hungry. Everybody needs to eat in order to stay alive, but you don't have to eat right now. You can put it off for an hour. You can put it off for a day if you need to, right? During Ramadan, people put it off for not days, but long stretches of time, especially when it happens during the summer, right? So from sunset or from sunup to sundown, no eating. Do people get hungry during Ramadan? Yeah. Come iftar, they're all like, oh yeah, mashallah. Right? This is great. So people need to eat, but they don't have to eat right now. Sexual arousal too. So I said rest and digest, but think about the mating. If we want there to be more humans in the future, we need to mate too. Now, there are different parts of the mating process. There's this arousal portion of the mating process where people get turned on, and this allows them to have sex, but like people don't need to have sex right now. Some of you might be aroused right now in this class and you're thinking, boy, that guy who's sitting next to me is so cute, or that girl right next to me is so cute, but you don't have to do anything right now. You can wait until later to talk to them, right? The sympathetic nervous system, this is not dealing with our long-term needs that can be dealt with anytime. These have to do with things that we need to deal with right now, or there's going to be big problems. So we have fight, flight, and also orgasm. So imagine that we see a tiger. What do we need to do? We need to run away. When do we need to do it?
Right now.
Right now, right? We're not like, oh, okay, there's a tiger here in our classroom, but I'm going to wait until the teacher finishes the lecture to leave, right? You're going to leave right now. It's an immediate need. Or maybe some person comes to attack you. Ah! And maybe you can't run anywhere because we're in a small space, so what do you need to do? You need to fight. When do you need to fight? Right now. So the sympathetic is handling things that need to happen right now. So the point where the orgasm comes in, so when people are having sex, like in the middle of having sex, like in the movies, you might see where there's a couple having sex, maybe a young couple, and then their parents come home. And what do? They stop, and they run away, right? Because they can have sex later. But the orgasm is like an immediate need. Once you get to a certain level, like they say that it's coming, because it's coming. You're not going to stop it. It's automatic, and it has to be done right now. So the parasympathetic, we're talking about resting, digestion, and also arousal. Whereas the sympathetic, we're talking about fighting, fleeing, and orgasm. So the parasympathetic, it decreases your heart rate, decreases your breathing rate, increases your digestion, whereas the sympathetic sort of does the opposite of this. Increases your blood rate, increases your blood pressure, increases the rate that you're breathing. We have some adrenaline being released, and also notice we have cortisol being released. Cortisol is going to be really important for our class tomorrow when we talk about health. So we have these incredibly adaptive responses when we're faced with a life or death situation that has a limited duration. One other thing I want to say to maybe help you guys remember this. I made up a rap some years ago. This is a dorky rap because I'm a professor, so I'm a dorky kind of guy. But it goes, the sympathetic nervous system is for fighting and fleeing. The parasympathetic is for pooping and peeing. Parasympathetic, the P, and the P. So if you can remember that, you'll get it on the exam hopefully. All right, so these fight or flight responses are great when we have an immediate threat. We have a lion that's on the loose right next to us. We have a bully that's going to take us out. These really rapid, strong responses that increase our heart rate, increase our breathing rate, allow us to get out of the situation or fight in the situation better. But what happens if instead of it being a limited time or a real thing, what if it's just imaginary? Like the stressor's imaginary. So if you remember one of the earlier definitions of stress, it said a response to an event, real or imagined, something like this. So maybe it's not a lion or a tiger, but it's something else. So this means that it doesn't actually have to be a threat. All that has to happen is for you to perceive a threat. This means that you can perceive things as threats that really aren't. How many of you guys are afraid of snakes?
Snakes?
Yeah.
Everybody.
Not
Everyone's
TV,
afraid of
everybody
snakes.
tries cereal. Of course I speak.
A lot of people are afraid of snakes. Not all snakes are venomous. Not all of them will kill you. In fact, some of them won't even really bite very much. So there are these garter snakes in America. I guess they probably have a similar snake here. They're really pretty harmless. But people, despite knowing that they're harmless, they don't want to get near it and pick it up. So I caught a garter snake one time. I got a shovel or something. I didn't touch it with my hands because I was scared. But then I showed it to another faculty member at my former university, and she picked it up with her hands. She's just like, oh, look at this. Oh, it's cute. She called her daughter, who was 3 years old. She's like, here. I'm like, right? It's stressing me out. It's not stressing her out. Why? I mean, it's either a threat or it's not. But she wasn't perceiving a threat. I was. Right? Regardless of whether the threat was real. So the threat doesn't have to be real. People are afraid of the dark. My kids are afraid of the dokuzadam. So the dokuzadam, I have no idea how this got started. So when we first came to Turkey, we started teaching the kids how to count iki, uch, dokus. And then they were talking about this bad guy who would come, and his name was the dokuzadam. Or the Doku's man. It's sort of like a boogeyman. Have you guys heard of the boogeyman? He comes and he gets you if you're bad. So they made up a name for the boogeyman, the Dokuzadam. And then they would really freak themselves out. They would talk about it before they would go to bed, and they would get freaked out. And this is something that they made up, Okay, the threat is subjective. So how much of a threat do you think I find being in front of 30 people and talking? Sometimes I find it a threat. Usually every semester, the first class that I teach is a threat. I'm nervous. I feel okay, well last semester went well, but what if I lost it? What if I can't teach anymore? It's been a while. So it makes me anxious. I feel stress. But for some of you guys, if I asked you to come up here and give it, finish the lecture for me,
Really stressful.
it'd be very stressful, right? So the difference isn't the threat. The same threat is present, whether it's me or you. What differs is our perception, right? Same thing with asking people out on a date. You have some people who are really smooth and they go up to people and they say, hey, you want to go to Taksim and, I don't know, go to some club in Taksim? I'm married with kids, so I don't know what the pocket clubs are. And other people, they might want to call somebody, but they can't do it, or they call and they hang up because they're perceiving this threat as much bigger than the other person. Okay, so the threat can be imaginary. It can be completely unreal. And unfortunately, it can also be ongoing. So when we talk about lions and tigers and bullies, these are things that have short durations, normally. There's the tiger. If you don't get away from it, you're dead. When you're dead, no more stress. If you get away from it, after you're away, no more stress, right? So it's a limited duration. But some things don't have these limited durations. So all of the faculty here at Shahir are on one-year contracts. This means every year we sign a contract for the next year. And we don't know for sure, or at least I don't know for sure, if I'm going to get a contract before the next year ends. And in a lot of universities where they have this year-to-year contract thing, this is fairly typical. People are worried. Am I going to get a contract? Oh, I think the students like me. I think I do a good job teaching. Oh, I sure hope they'll give me a contract. But I don't know, right? So how long do I have to wait? How long can this potentially stress me out? This can stress me out until mid to late August when I actually get the contract or not, right? So this is a really long period of time. If I am perceiving this threat and thinking about it regularly, what's going to happen? Well, the autonomic nervous system gets triggered when you perceive the threat, when you think about the threat. So this means if I'm constantly thinking about the threat, I'm going to be stressed out a lot. Thank goodness I'm not worried about this too much.
But
If I was, this would be a big problem. Yeah.
But that also means that September will come and then a new year will come, and then you have to think about the next year.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, at the school I was at previously, they had a different amount of time. So people would get their contracts in May, but you would know whether or not you were getting a contract way before then. So depending on how long you had been at the university, you'd have different amounts of time. So if you've just been at the university for a year or two, you might only have a few months. If you've been there a couple of years, you might have 6 months. If you've been there a long time, you might have a whole year. So you'll know a year in advance that you're going to have a contract the next year, right? So this really reduces stress by being able to know. And it's one of the things I would really like Shahir to do. Just tell me in December if I'm going to have a contract or not for next year. It'd make my life easier. But I don't think about it too much, so I don't perceive that great of a threat, which is great because that means that my autonomic nervous system isn't continually being activated. If it was, I would be continually pumping out cortisol, which is bad stuff, as we're going to learn about tomorrow. So if stress is chronic, we're pumping out a lot of cortisol, and we have something else too. So Sally talked about a general adaptation syndrome. Is there a clock in here? What time is it? I don't want to go too long. Thank you. Oh, good. Good grief. Okay, so with Sally's general adaptation syndrome, the idea is that you're starting off at a point of homeostasis. So at the beginning here, we have this flat line, right? This is homeostasis. And what happens is that some stressor appears. So, boom, there's a stressor that appears. And notice I said that this is going to be a chronic stressor. So the chronic stressor appears, throws our body out of homeostasis, possibly, if it's something like heat or food, lack of food. If it's something else like worrying about a contract, it might not be something that's throwing you out of homeostasis in that way. But anyway, the idea is that this chronic stressor appears, and your body, your sympathetic nervous system, kicks in. It puts you in a fight or flight mode, so you can deal with the stress. And it can't tell the difference between stress that you need to run away from and stress that you need to study hard for. like an exam that's coming up. So the sympathetic nervous system kicks in, and as it kicks in, it allows you to combat that stressor better and better, right? If you are worried about failing an exam and your sympathetic nervous system kicks in, you'll be able to stay up later in the night and study for it. So this is good. So your sympathetic nervous system kicks in, but if it's continually being activated over and over again, chronically, it loses its effectiveness. It stops being able to perform as well. It's like running a marathon or exercising for a really long period of time, right? You start running and you feel good. And after a few miles, well, I guess it depends on who the runner is, but at some point, most people become exhausted. They stop being able to run as well as they do. And the sympathetic nervous system stops being able to respond as well. And we become exhausted. When we're exhausted, this doesn't mean that our sympathetic nervous system isn't trying anymore. It's still trying. It's just not having a big effect because it's exhausted. So this is bad. When people are in this exhaustion stage, they get sick much more easily. They die much more quickly. This is bad stuff. So can you avoid being exhausted? The good answer is, in a lot of cases, you can. So there's this Lazarus transaction model, and he says that the experience of stress depends crucially on things related to perception. So he says that there's this primary appraisal that we do. Something happens and we appraise it, meaning like go over it, try to figure out its value and its meaning to us. So we figure out what the stressor is demanding from us. What is the potential threat? So we're a little bit hungry. What's the threat? I'm going to die. Am I going to die right now? No, not a big threat. There's a lion right there. What's the potential threat? I could die. Am I going to die right now? Probability high. Right? So we do this appraisal. And based on this appraisal, our sympathetic nervous system engages more or less strongly. Right? Oh, I don't have food. I'm a little hungry. No big deal. I'll go to Cafe Crown later. Right? The lion comes. I better get away right now. Much stronger response. We also do a secondary appraisal. Not only what are the potential threats, but the coping resources. How well are we able to deal with this threat? So when I talked about going to Cafe Crown, I sort of included this one too. So we have this potential threat of death from not eating. It's a small threat right now. But what can we do about it? It's easy for us to deal with this threat. We just go to Cafe Crown or the cafeteria, problem solved. Right? Whereas the lion, how well are you prepared to run away from a lion? Probably not very well. Lions run pretty fast. Compared to me, they run really, really fast. So you make this secondary appraisal and figure out how well you're able to respond to the threat. Imagine that someone's coming up and they're going to, ask you for your money. Give me your money. And they've got a knife. Give me your money, man. What's the potential threat? I could die. Oh, this stinks, right? Okay, secondary appraisal. I'm an MFC fighter. Bring it on, man! Wah! Right? If you think that your resources are high, this isn't going to create as much stress as it would be for someone who isn't a UFC fighter, right? All right, and then finally we do this cognitive reappraisal based on what's happening to us to say whether or not, our earlier appraisals were realistic or not. It actually turns out that I'm really, really, really hungry, and this early appraisal of being hungry is not a big deal. It actually is. I need food right now, right? So we can reappraise our previous appraisals. If our resources are greater than the demands, we don't have distress, or maybe we don't have very much. If the resources are less than the demands, we get a lot of distress. All right, so primary appraisal, we're assessing the demands, right? We see a tiger, it's a threat. We see a tiger behind the bars, not a threat. We have this little kid over here. He's a geeky guy like me. And here comes the big, tough school bully. He's a threat. Because the geeky guy, this is stereotypical, but if he was like me, he didn't have the resources to combat us. But if you have someone else with different levels of resources, not a threat, right? All right, so there's some interesting implications that have to deal with this perception. So if you guys have seen movies about, I don't know, about medieval times during the wars where people had like arrows stuck in them and they had to get them out, or maybe the American Civil War where they were cutting off legs to stop gangrene. They didn't have anesthetic. And what are the people doing when they're having the arrows pulled out and their legs sawed off? You can see what they do if you watch Saw. Testere?
Yes.
Yeah. Or Hostel or any of those movies. Are the people like, oh yeah, he's cut me open. Go for it, man. Feel good about yourself. No, they're like, ah! Right? If we do surgery with no anesthetic, which is what they do basically in Saw and Hostel and some of those other horror movies, the people have lots and lots of stress. Saw wouldn't be a very good movie if they took the people and they're like, okay, I'm going to cut you up, but first I'm going to, put you to sleep so you don't feel anything. And then for the rest of the movie, you see someone lying there like this, right? So the people who are under anesthetic don't have as much stress. The threat is actually the same, right? You're still having your organs cut open and stitched together and messed around with, so you've got the exact same threat. The only difference is in perception. The people who are awake are perceiving it. Oh, they're feeling the pain. Ah! The people who are under anesthetic aren't, right? Some interesting studies were done with people that were dying. So Symington, he looked at people who were dying that were in a coma or not in a coma. And he found that the people that were not in a coma, by being aware that they were dying, they showed much higher stress responses. Similarly, Mason, he was a little bit meaner. Rather than just letting people die, he applied heat to them to make them uncomfortable, to make you hot. And he did this to some people that were unconscious, and he did this to other people who were conscious. And what happened? People that were conscious showed a lot more stress. They showed increased sizes of their adrenal glands. The awesome implications of all of this is that when you're under stress, you can reappraise the stressor. So when you're freaked out about an exam, or about a talk, or about talking to someone that you like, you can reappraise the stressor and maybe not feel so stressed out. You can look at it something as an opportunity for growth. The opportunity you have to give a talk in front of the class, this can make you become a better public speaker, which can help you get better jobs. It's an opportunity for growth. But if you perceive it as, oh crap, my friends are going to think I'm an idiot, if you appraise it that way, it's going to be a lot more stressful. You can reappraise your ability to respond. Are there ways that you can avoid the stressor? Maybe there's someone who bothers you at the school. Maybe you don't need to let them bother you by figuring out where they aren't and hanging out in those situations. Can you cope better with stress? So I created what I like to think is a better definition, but there's still some problems. So the effect of a body's attempts to maintain or restore homeostasis in response to or in preparation for a stimulus or event that either has the ability or is perceived as having the ability to upset homeostasis or reduce fitness. It's a lot of ors in there. It's a fairly complex definition. But it captures a lot of things. It captures this difference between perception. It has this idea about threat and its relationship to homeostasis. And also the effects, so we can include not just the response, but also the ending states, exhaustion. All right, final thoughts. Not all or even most stress is bad. There are lots of stress that's good for us. If you go to work out, if you go running, if you go swimming, your body undergoes stress. And what happens when your body undergoes this stress for small amounts of time? When you have time to recover, your body gets stronger. So a little bit of stress is actually a really good thing. There's eustress versus distress. There's that excited stress feeling that you have before you know you're going to get a present. Oh, what's it going to be? I'm excited, I'm excited. Your sympathetic nervous system is engaged in the same way that it is when you're freaked out excited, but the perception's a little bit different. So one you have eustress and one you have distress. Stress also affects your ability to perform. Remember when we talked about Yerkes-Dodson? We want to be sort of at that moderate level of arousal. So try to remember this. If you're stressed out about an exam, try to reduce the level of stress before you go into the exam because you don't want to be too aroused or you're not going to perform it. Finally, next class we'll talk about how stress can affect your health. The biggest thing is that you guys have control, a lot of control. over a lot of the stress that you guys experience. All right, next class we'll talk about health. See you guys then.